in season or out of season. But that same thinking, whether it's convenient or not, it doesn't matter when the time is. Preach the message. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with complete patience and instruction. That little phrase at the end there is very key. Okay, even when it comes to exhorting or encouraging something, we want to encourage our youth and other people in what's right and true. But it says to do it with complete patience. I'm a parent, okay? So I know that is difficult a lot of times, most of the time, okay? But it says to do it with complete patience and with teaching and instruction. Okay, so in light of that, Katrina, I'm actually going to get her to come up here and help me out, just answering a couple questions here. Katrina works at the Pregnancy Center in Kitchener-Waterloo, and she speaks to a lot of students, a lot more students than I do or want to. So I think this year we're up between like 4,000 and 4,500 students, like for the school year, which is a ton. So I'm gonna let Katrina help me answer a question here. Steal this from me.
You have to share.
We do have to share.
Wait, just for clarity, he's a great multitasker when he's doing one task.
It's true.
I want to encourage you.
I can do lots of tasks in succession.
I support that.
So this is a question I like Katrina to answer. What do you hear from students that they find difficult or a challenge in life? What is their biggest challenge that you are hearing from them?
We did talk about some of this last night, but I do kind of want to paint a little bit of a picture for you and to understand that our younger students right now, specifically born like probably 2000 and up, are what we refer to as Gen Z. So this younger generation being Gen Z. And I will tell you that as much as there is out there that is kind of negative that is talked about as far as this generation goes, I am super excited when I'm with this generation because they're unique in a way that we never had that opportunity even to see the world differently than how I grew up. If I just want to give you a really brief example of that, when I was a kid I was told to eat my food at dinner, finish the plate of food that was in front of me because there was children starving around the world. And I used to think, really? Where are they? Because I don't see them. And what's unique about this generation is that they do see them. Actually, they're more socially active as far as injustice in this world and the things that they're doing to change this world. It's predicted that if fostered and if wisdom is given to this younger generation, that they will change the world in a way that we can't even fathom because of how much voice they actually have. And when it comes to that they love it. But the thing is with this younger generation, this Gen Z, is that it said that they actually fear rejection more than they fear death itself. That they fear rejection. If you look at this at all and kind of unpack it, you will see it makes sense. It makes sense that actually self-harm is incredibly common. And that the rates of suicide among our youth today has gone up so much because of this piece of rejection. Guys, if there's pressure to fit in and a culture that is very loud in the ways that it subtly shapes the way that they're thinking, it makes sense that they live in a peer-led culture. That what I love about this generation is that they really want to be authentic. I love that about them. They love having a voice, that voice being in many different venues, so as in social media, on the internet, and they'll use that as their voice, so specifically their voice being online as opposed to face-to-face. And that's where they try to find it, this love for it. But basically what they are is they're an entire group of people that are making their decisions based on what everybody else is doing, with a love for authenticity that really isn't authentic. And that isn't much different from any other generation before. We talked about this last night. Right? I remember doing what my friends were doing because that's what my friends were doing. But the reality is that the culture that they live in today is so much louder for them. it's so much louder. The impact on them is huge. See, there's this tension in the world today, and I get this tension. It's not just for them, it's for me as an adult as well. That we want to be known. We really want to be known. We post what we're eating for dinner on Facebook, right? We want to be known. But yet, there's fear in being known. There's a lot of fear in really being known. And so if I am truly vulnerable about my struggles and the things that I'm wrestling with, if I'm truly vulnerable about my faith, my feelings and fear, well, I'm going to tell you that I don't feel that safe. If you spend any amount of time on social media, what kids are spending a ton of time on, right? YouTube, just put it out there. You'll see that the comments they're not nice. They're awful. So actually what's happening is there's a fear that if I'm really known, I might be judged. And if I'm judged, then I might be left alone at the end of the day as the only one who knows how I really feel, and that feels incredibly empty and lonely. And so they get stuck in this way of thinking, not really examining why they think the ways that they do. Because when I look around, when they look around, they see, well, I'm just doing what seems normal. I don't really want to examine it, because making sense of it is really hard. The very thought of being found out by people causes so much anxiety in kids. I will tell you that I see that they're paralyzed in that anxiety. It actually affects their everyday living because there's so much fear in that truly being known by somebody else. If I put myself out there and then perhaps I'm an outcast because of it, well, to be perfectly honest, I would rather just do what everybody else is doing because I don't want to not fit in. The pressure that's there. See, we have to give them this place where they feel safe to wrestle with these things. You gotta wrestle. We wrestle. And this place where you can feel it. This one student, he came up to me after class. He was grade 12, 17 years old. I couldn't believe his vulnerability. He said, let's chat. I said, okay, let's walk. So we walked the halls a little bit. And he started to tell me his story and the things that he's wrestling with. Just to put it out there, heartbreaking. At 17 years old, but amazing that he was able to see it and at this point be examining it. Just from what he heard in class, in a public school classroom. And so he begins to tell me this, and something he said triggered a thought in me. Is this kid a believer? I just thought, and so I took a really big risk. It's a big risk that you take when you're in the public school system. And I said, are you a Christian? And he was like, yeah, I am. And I said, can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with God? Like, how is that relationship for you? You know what he said? He said, this stuff, it gets in the way. This stuff in my life that I struggle with that no one else knows about. And I'll tell you that he went to an evangelical church since he was a little kid. He told me his story. And not once did he feel like that was a safe place to say that because of these things in my life, I don't even really understand that relationship with God because it feels absolutely empty. At Easter, I was reminded, as I was even thinking about all these different stories that I hear from kids, that think about that empty tomb. What I wanted him to understand was that it's in that emptiness, it's in that brokenness, it's in that really being known by God that Jesus fits. Because until you see that empty tomb, and it just feels empty, and you're just staring at the empty tomb like Peter and John and like Mary did when she first got there, you just feel like all the hope is gone. It's just defeat. And Jesus is actually tapping and saying, turn around and look. That until you see that emptiness, then you don't see the light. You have the life that's there and the fullness of it. And so this is why I think it's important that we actually have to understand culture. We have to kind of embrace it as a conversation that we want to have with them, to kind of interpret it. Last night I said, because the gospel and the bigger story of Jesus Christ and the entire Bible, take the big picture story, not just the things that hit us, that we want to deal with, issues, but that bigger story and say, how does the gospel, what does the gospel say here? How does culture fit into that? How does culture fit into the gospel? And how does Jesus fit into my everyday life? And I will tell you that as I was sitting there and we were singing, I didn't plan to say this, but the Holy Spirit spoke to me in a little bit and he said to me, I'm going to bring here a little tears. If you knew our story, and you knew how empty it felt, that there wasn't hope, I would tell you, man, Jesus fits. Even when you don't think it can be fixed, even when everything around you is shattered and broken, that's when he fits. It's when you see that it's empty, it's when you see that empty tomb that he taps you and he says, turn around and look. Because it's in that emptiness that you see how much I am alive and present. That we would be able to even be standing here as a couple before you today. That in that brokenness, we always said, I wonder what Jesus would do with our story. It's a whole nother day. But to tell you that we're actually standing here and doing this together, Jesus fits. He fits so good. Is that what you're looking for?
Got it. Pretty sure I started by saying I came to have fun, not be emotional, but thank you anyway. Goodness. Now I'm supposed to finish, so. Okay. So yeah, I love having Katrina's perspective from being firsthand right there with the kids. It's so different, and you know the same as me. Somebody else, like think of yourself when you were a kid, right? There were certain adults or people in your life that you could talk to, you could be open with, you knew they cared for you, you knew they were genuine, and you could connect. It wasn't always like that with your parents, right? Mostly because of your own perspective. You're like, man, they don't know what they're talking about, and that, right? But for somebody to be able to come in and speak to these kids, that there's no threat, right? They can be vulnerable, and they know, I might not even ever see this person. So she has a very unique perspective to be able to come in and hear from these kids and hear their honest answers, and it's incredible. So thank you for sharing that with us. But the idea that somebody could fear rejection that much, it really paints this question that we have, how does Jesus relate to everyday life? It paints it a little bit different, because you think, okay, so now if they are seeing anything about Jesus or faith or their Christianity or their beliefs or standing out as something that might receive rejection, you see the ordeal, right? You see the concern and why there's so much contemplation. Like, okay, like, do I want to risk this? Do I even believe this? Katrina referred to culture, just so we know a little bit about some of the terms we're using and throwing around. This is a very simple idea of culture. A guy, Brett Kunkel, said it this way: culture is what humans make of the world. Okay, so it's not the world itself. It's, as we talked last night, if you were there, about the ideas, beliefs, the ideas that are behind the scenes, so to speak, the unseen portions that kind of drive the decisions that are being made by people living in a society. That's the overarching culture. So you think of it, a church even, right? People speak of sometimes a church culture, right? Or a cultural Christianity, which isn't necessarily a good thing. It's basically just kind of fitting into the flow and looking like that is around you. You might not be genuine. If you go down to the southern states where I grew up, very unique and different culture. There's a southern culture there, right? You go to the west coast of North America, very unique culture. Go to PEI, it's a whole other planet, right? It's its own place. Like, there's such a different culture. And none of those cultures in and of themselves are moral or immoral, right? They're what we call amoral, which they're essentially neutral. But the culture is what drives the decisions. The decisions that are being made are where we cross a line, whether it's something that, in the Christian culture we refer to as sin, right? As something being immoral according to the standard that we hold, which is the Bible, right? So that's a little bit just about culture. Very intrinsic in culture is the whole idea of a worldview. And maybe you've heard the term used. Everyone, whether you know it or not, everyone has a worldview. You might not be aware of what it is, but essentially it's how you see and how you think about everything in the world and how you make sense of it. So for me, if I'm coming from what I consider a biblical worldview, and I see bad things happening, I see tragedy, I see failure, I see death, I see things that I would say, those are bad. I have a way to understand and process that, because I look at the Bible and I see, okay, well, God created a good, perfect world, but sin came to the world. I see the fall. I see that now there's this curse that we have this freedom and we've chosen to go against God's instruction, against God's design. And so I can make sense of why there's evil, why things are happening, right? So that helps me to process that. Somebody from a completely different worldview is going to have some very different thinking, right? It's a lot of times, if somebody claims to be an atheist or agnostic, that's why, because they don't have a way of processing why there's so much bad. How can there be a good God and so much bad? Right? So you can see why it's important to kind of understand the worldview you're actually coming from. As far as when it comes to generations and kind of where those lines are between different generations, depending on the resource you use, you'll find a little bit of fluctuation, but this is where, for the majority of those resources, where they land, specifically with the Barna group. So you might be able to find yourself up there in some of these years, unless you're like 3. Then you're probably not caring what's on the screen anyways. So at the bottom, I apologize, if you were born before 1946, you don't really get like a catchy generation name. You're just elder. So I guess it was before really. Back, did you really care? Like when you were a kid, did your parents care what they probably called you some things, but it had nothing to do with your generation, right? So this is where we're at, as we kind of start labeling these generations, trying to understand ways of thinking and why people are doing things the way they are. So I technically fall in the very end of Gen X, but we were talking the other day, and I think Katrina and I both, we feel that we've actually been more influenced by the millennial generation than even where we were technically born. So we don't fit the traditional generational label, but that's fine. It just gives us an idea of where we're coming from and what we're referring to. Why is it actually important for us to even talk with this? Like seriously, it's a Sunday. Read some Bible verses. Why are we talking about this kind of stuff? I honestly believe this is extremely important for us to think through and process and understand. If we care at all about influencing younger generations and our youth and our family and neighbors and all of that, we have to show them that we actually care. We actually want to invest and do some of the hard work and the thinking and trying to connect and relate. So it's very necessary. There's a verse in Proverbs 18:13. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. You know as much as I do, there's a difference between hearing someone and actually hearing them, right? We joke about, our kids, they heard us. Yeah, they heard us like making noise, but they didn't hear what we were telling them, what our instruction was. Okay, and I fear that this is often what we do with our youth. I think sometimes we don't take what they're saying to heart. We don't actually place the value that should be there on what they're saying and their opinions, and actually showing them that, hey, you know what? You matter. What you think matters. Even if I don't agree with it, it matters. And I need to try to understand, why are you thinking that way? Like, what makes you think that? Why do you believe this that you're saying? I believe it is so important for us to think through these things. Just a little bit of some stats. Some of these, honestly, I still read them and I'm shocked. And I know stats, there's some fluctuation in how accurate they are in them, but for the most part, they give us a good picture of where things are at. 75% of elders, so again, those born about 1946 and before, believe the Bible to be authoritative. This is not just for Christian people that are claiming to be Christian. This is just across the board. If you're human, okay, 75%, that's a pretty big percentage that actually see the Bible as an authority. So this makes sense why in the Billy Graham era, he could stand up in front of thousands of people and say, literally his whole message was, the Bible says God created you. The Bible says you're a sinner. The Bible says Jesus came, died on the cross, was resurrected, and provides forgiveness for you. The Bible says if you believe in Jesus, you will be saved. And there's like thousands of people that respond to this. Why? Because they took the Bible to be authoritative. He could stand up there and just say, and I'm not oversimplifying it, but he literally would take the Bible and preach the Bible And he could do that because there was a foundation there where people were already accepting it as authoritative. That's not necessarily the case. Okay, so 2 generations later, we get to the millennials. So less than 50% of millennials believe the Bible to be authoritative. So just in 2 generations, that's a large decrease. So then we get to another couple of generations. We get to Gen Z, so our current most youthful generation. They're known as the most non-Christian generation in American history. Doesn't sound very good. 4%, this blows my mind, 4% of teens in Generation Z, and again, not just Christian, but all youth, okay? 4% hold a biblical worldview. Even more baffling, out of that same group, 59% of those in that group consider themselves Christian. So 59% are saying, I'm a Christian, but out of those same youth, only 4% are actually holding a biblical worldview. So I don't know what the other 55% are believing. And somehow they're under the assumption that they can say I'm Christian without holding a biblical worldview. Somewhere that has shifted where those two things can be separate. 61%, okay, and this is where we go a little more specific to church-going Gen Z teens. 61% agree that the Bible principles are accurate. So, in my mind anyways, it begs the question, why are you in church? Why are you church-going if what you're supposed to be holding as a standard, like, getting close to half, 61%, don't even hold the Bible to be true, to be authoritative, to be accurate, even in its principles. They're not even talking about the inerrant Word of God. They're just talking about the principles of the Bible, and only 61%. This is extremely concerning. Why does this happen? How do we get to a place where these are the stats we're seeing? I think one of the biggest things that has impacted this is the mentality of dividing what we refer to as sacred and secular. So somewhere, somehow, there's been a line drawn where everything Jesus related is over here, and everything else is on this side. So on the Jesus side, you have faith and grace and ethics and missions and your devotions and theology and evangelism and spiritual disciplines, spiritual warfare, Sundays, that's God's day, and all these things are kind of put in that Jesus category or faith category. And then on the other side, you have pretty much everything natural and physical, works. So your job, your reasoning, business, politics, physical ministries, science, economics, mass media, the arts, your weekdays, social justice. So all of those things, by some, are seen as kind of not faith-related. This is extremely troubling, and maybe we just haven't thought through it, that this is how it is, but this is honestly how too many of us actually live. And we treat faith, we keep it kind of compartmentalized, like, I got Jesus is part of my life. I'm not sure that's biblical, right? Because the Bible says that for someone who has trusted Christ, Jesus is your life. You actually died, and Jesus is your life. He gives you new life. So it's more than just a compartment or this new little addition to your neat and tidy life. He is to be our life. Turn to John 17 for just a minute. Thinking of this whole sacred versus secular divide, is there any evidence of this at all in the Bible that we would ever see something like this? I don't think you will find it. In John 17, verse 14, so this is Jesus, and he's actually praying. He's praying for the disciples, and I love near the end of what we read, he actually includes, just in case we were wondering, and I also am praying for those who will believe in the future, essentially, right? From the message that the disciples will take forward. So good news is we're covered, okay, in this. So John 17, verse 14, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. I am not asking you to take them out of the world, but that you keep them safe from the evil one. They do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. Set them apart in the truth. Your word is truth. Just as you sent me into the world, so I send them into the world. And I set myself apart on their behalf, so that they too may truly be set apart. And this is where he says in verse 20, I am not praying only on their behalf, but also on behalf of those who believe in me through their testimony. Jesus knows nothing of this model. Nothing at all. When you read through the Gospels and you see the life of Jesus, just the part of Jesus that we know, just the stories that we're told, okay, because obviously there's way more. But what we know in the Gospels of Jesus and his interaction with people, it's totally countercultural to this model. When he is in a religious context or building or anything like that, it's usually not good. Like, if he's in there, he's usually talking to the Pharisees and they're being called snakes or sons of the devil or having tables flipped over. Like, there's stories like that in the Bible where that doesn't happen now. Okay, I'm not suggesting any of that for this morning. I'm saying let's look at what Jesus did and didn't do and try to understand, well, why? Why was he acting this way? He saw life, all of life, as a whole picture. There weren't all these compartments of it. So he wasn't all about just looking religious. He was genuine. He was the true definition of being genuine. We would see him go to places where culture would say that he wasn't really supposed to, and talking to people that he really shouldn't have been talking to. He actually went and pursued people like the woman at the well, or like the lady who was caught in adultery, and actually stood in place, stood out, and called the people out. You know, the lady that's caught in adultery, he walks up and basically challenges the people that are getting ready to lawfully stone her, and he stands in between them and takes up for her. So somebody that he shouldn't have even been talking to or been around, he's making it his business. This is like mind-blowing for us because it totally goes against our way of thinking. So social justice, Katrina mentioned like the impact that the youngest generation now and the interaction that they have and the focus they have on social justice, it's biblical. And we need to help them see that. The thing that they're passionate about, Jesus is passionate about. And I think if we can help them see that actually fits with where they're at, then that will drive what's good, right? And instead of focusing on the negatives and too much tech and too much this and that, let's actually promote what is good and what is proper, and let's see that actually increase. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a personal example. Some of it's just kind of from my own passion, but also my own experience. I can't talk from other people's experience. So for me, my role at work right now is I'm a forensic identification officer. So I go to crime scenes and I get to process evidence and looking for things. So for me, there's a big word, maybe you've heard of it, deoxyribonucleic acid. Have you ever heard of that? A couple people? DNA? There's a reason we call it DNA, right? Because nobody wants to even try to say or spell, try to be in court and have to explain that, right? It's not fun. So DNA is an absolutely incredible thing, okay? When you look at a picture like this on the screen, it's like, oh yeah, that's cool, that's neat. It's obviously magnified, like a lot. But there's a quote at the top there I'll just read. The great theologian Bill Gates, he says this, he says, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. If Bill Gates is saying that, you know it's true, because he's not going to admit too much that is beyond his scope, and the Microsoft engineers are not able to duplicate this, right? So that says something. That's pretty incredible. So what DNA actually is, okay, it's a molecule. You'll see that little twisty shape on there. There's actually two strands okay? And each strand is a DNA molecule. So it's called a double helix, is that figure. It kind of looks like a twisty ladder, right? So just one of those strands, okay, one of the longer strands is a DNA molecule. If you took the information that you could fit on a DVD, so take an average of, you know, like the recordable or rewritable DVDs, as much information as you can fit on one of those. Okay, so that's a lot of information, especially if you're doing like photos and things like that, and not even just video, but just information. You get a lot of information on one of those discs. Okay, so picture that, and then you have this tiny little microscopic DNA molecule that you can't see, unless it's magnified. In one DNA molecule, you can get enough information that you would need 500 billion DVDs in one DNA molecule. 500 billion, okay, like that's half a trillion. Like that is a lot. You can't even, like, how do you try to picture, well, let's see, you know, if I had a stack of 10, like you can't even do it. You can't even fathom like what that is. And that's why Bill Gates makes this statement, right? It's mind-blowing. And that's one DNA molecule. That's one that you can't see. And like there's literally countless of these through your body that contain enough information that is actually the instructions, the code to build everything about you. It's all through your body. How does that happen? When you read stuff from like Charles Darwin and some of the evolutional like way of thinking, what Darwin was working with, when you look at biology that he understood, was great for his time, but it was very, very basic. Okay, he knew things at a cellular level, but the cell was seen as like a Lego building block, right? So even though that's still really hard, you can see, okay, like a bunch of blocks can kind of pile up or do something, and there can be something a little bit unplanned, maybe. But he had no idea that this was here. I would love to be able to talk to Charles Darwin and explain this to him and see where he goes. Like, how does he process that? How does this not scream creator, designer, right? In the very DNA that makes us up. There's a reason that everything in us wants identity, and we chase identity, and we want to be an individual, we want to be our own person. It's literally in our DNA. It is. It's how we've been created by God. There's another, I think Joseph liked this one, there was another illustration kind of giving that visual, because I don't think I've ever seen, like 500 billion DVDs, how do you even try to visualize that? So, we did it this way. I don't have my pen. Yeah. If you took enough genetic material, like from DNA, just to be on the top of the pen, there you probably couldn't even tell if it's on there or not. Okay, if you took that and printed it out in like an average size novel, okay, so you printed all that out into novels, into books, and you somehow stacked all these novels up, it would be from the Earth to the Moon in 500 stacks. So, okay, let's say their math is off. Maybe they're way off, and it's only 50 stacks from the Earth to the Moon. Like that's still absolutely mind-boggling. It's crazy. And this is why I say it's even science. We can talk about it as Christians because it's ours. This is God's truth. This is God's design, God's creation. And we can look at these things and actually worship God just from what's around us. That's why he says in Romans that some of these things about God and him being eternal, like it's obvious what it should be. And the more and more we dig into science and these things, we see, like, what other reason? Like, what else do you need to see that there is some design behind this? Like, there's something bigger and way more intelligent than us to create something like this. Everybody wants to matter. And we've heard that with talking about our youth, but it's the same with us, with adults. Everybody wants to matter. Everybody wants identity. Something really cool about that I found in the end of Romans, in Romans 16, right at the very end of it. If you're like me, you've probably kind of just quickly read over it at the end, like you're reading the whole book of Romans, and it's really good, and you're focusing, and then I'm going to kind of just skip over the salutations and hope everything's going well from everybody. But there's something actually really cool at the end of Romans 16 that we're going to look at. But first, the whole idea of identity in ancient culture was incredible. Specifically when it came to names. Names were so important. And you see that through the Bible too. You see all the names that God gives himself in different titles. You see people in the Bible, Abram becoming Abraham, Saul being called Paul, all the time. You see the impact that it actually had with Daniel and his buddies when they were in Babylon, and they actually get new names, that are actually trying to strip them of their identity. Because Daniel and his buddies there all had names that spoke of God and who God is. And they were all given names that were actually referring to like the moon god and like different things. They were stripping them of who they were in their identity. Interestingly, if you were born in a super poor family, or maybe even a slave, sometimes you didn't even get a name. It's as if your parents were like, man, have a couple kids, and the third one. That's what they called him. He was 3. Like that was his name. So you actually had people grow up and they didn't have a name, they had a number. So thinking of that, look in Romans 16. So Paul, often in the Bible too, the authors would actually use someone to write their letter. So they would dictate it, it would be written for them. And that's the case in Romans. So in Romans 16, verse 21, Paul is given these greetings and just saying some things here, and he refers to Timothy. He says, my fellow worker, he greets you. So do Lucius, Jason, Sosipater, my compatriots. Then in verse 22, okay? One of two things. Either Paul is totally changing his name, or this is somebody else. So the guy that has actually been writing for Paul, his name is Tertius. So he says, I, Tertius, who am writing this letter, greet you in the Lord. Gaius, who is host to me and to the whole church, greets you. Erastus, the city treasurer, and our brother Quartus greet you. Tertius means third. Quartus, the last guy, means fourth. And in the middle of that, you had the city treasurer. Think about how backwards this would have been for Roman culture to have 2 guys who don't even have names be in fellowship with this group where you have the city treasurer, you have an apostle, you have this group of people that are all over the spectrum when it comes to social class and importance as far as the ancient culture would go. And Paul is seeing something in this guy saying, hey, like, go ahead, Tertius, give a shout out, right? Say hi to everybody, let them know you're here. And he gives Tertius value. He gives this guy who, from his birth, hasn't even really had a name other than, I was third. Oh, that's creative, right? He now gives him a place. And this goes with everything that Scripture teaches as far as Christ actually taking the old life of wherever we've come from and giving us value, giving us worth, giving us a place in his family. And we actually are given the very life of Christ and that identity with Christ. I love that. I think it's funny because I've read Romans often and never really noticed that part, so I started looking at those names, and that's awesome that Paul would do that he would give this guy an opportunity to be there with them and to be part of the family. It's a great thing. I'm going to get Joseph to come on up if he's ready there. Joseph's going to share a little bit about what it's like to be a 13, almost 14 year-old boy and young man in grade 8. So thinking of this question that we've talked about, he's going to let you know some of his thoughts.
My name's Joseph. I'm a grade 8 boy in a public school, and being a Christian outside of church is very difficult sometimes. At church it's easy because I feel comfortable and I have all these people supporting me in my faith, but at school it's a whole other story. At school the things people talk about and often do don't always match up with my faith. Most of the time I'm not even sure how to react. The pressure to fit in is one of the greatest pressures of all, especially when it seems so normal. It's like everyone makes their own choices, not thinking about how it impacts the other people around them. I would say Jesus plays a major role in my life at school. I always try to stay away from the bad conversations going on, but if I'm being honest, it's pretty much impossible. No matter where I go, I hear guys and girls talking about things that you wouldn't think a grade 8 would even know, or would even be talking about. There isn't really anyone standing back and questioning things that are being said or thinking it's a big deal. I have friends that struggle with mental health and self-harm. I know kids that are asking other people for inappropriate photos, kids that talk about girls disrespectfully, and kids that are showing other kids things on their phones that aren't so cool. The music that is popular is lyrically awful, and the message is confusing to me. I have a song that I listen to by a Christian artist named Lecrae. In it he says, "Say I won't, I ain't, why y'all scared to be different?" Sometimes I think about this song and I know that I won't be afraid to be different than other people at school. I want to be able to stand out as a Christian and for people to realize that I'm different because of my faith and because of my relationship with Jesus Christ. A few days ago, I started a short reading plan called Set Apart. It's about how we need to be set apart for God. I know that I have to learn who God is. Jesus needs to be in every part of my life, not just one. I think it's important to practice these things. We need to practice prayer in our everyday lives. We also need to know that prayer is a skill and it takes time to learn. We also need to remember that prayer may feel awkward at first, but we must embrace the awkward to get to the awesome. In 1 Thessalonians 5, it says, "And we urge you, brothers and sisters, to admonish the undisciplined, comfort the discouraged, help the weak, be patient toward all. See that no one pays back evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good for one another and for all. Always rejoice, constantly pray, in everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you in Jesus Christ." For me, this means praying for my friends at school and that they can develop a relationship with God in their own lives. In the plan I was reading, I also read about how we become like who we hang out with. So that means we should surround ourselves with people that have a relationship with God and that are a good influence for us. This doesn't mean we can't be friends with people that aren't Christians. It just means we should be careful who we hang out with. This is just another great reason we should pray every day, because the more we hang out with God, the more like Him we will become. So we should put aside time every day, even if it's only like 5 minutes, to pray and to have a conversation with God.
Thanks, Joe. It's very cool. Obviously I'm biased because he's one of my kids, right? And good job, son. But I would tell you this, okay? We get to know Joe and some of his friends, and just to see with Ben and Sam the same. They're not quite as vocal and don't necessarily want to come up here, but they could share similar stories. And I'll say this, there's a lot of other kids like that. I guarantee you, you're sitting there and you can think of someone who's a youth, a student, middle school, high school, and they're going through these same challenges. They're facing these same struggles. They're having these same doubts. They have the same questions. And what I want to encourage us to do is to be aware of it and to be the safe place where they can come and talk. To be the one that, no matter what you want to say, just hang on to it for a minute. Remember Proverbs 18:13, right? Hear first, listen first, let them talk. Because I know when I was a kid, it was like going to the dentist to get me talking. It was painful. Like I would not talk and open up. And now Katrina can't get me to be quiet. So that'll change. But there's hope. There is hope. And that's one of the things I want to leave you with is that there is hope for this generation. It is not hopeless because it's not dependent on us. It's not dependent on them. We have a Savior who has overcome the world. Right? I think He can handle Gen Z. Okay? We're going to close with a short passage in Psalm. And again, just thinking of this, how does Jesus relate to my everyday life? Psalm 139. David says, Lord, you examine me and you know. You know when I sit down and when I get up. Even from far away, you understand my motives. You carefully observe me when I travel or when I lie down to rest. You are aware of everything I do. Certainly my tongue does not frame a word without you, oh Lord, being thoroughly aware of it. You squeeze me in from behind and in front. You place your hand on me. Your knowledge is beyond my comprehension. It is so far beyond me. I'm unable to fathom it. Where can I go to escape your spirit? Where can I flee to escape your presence? If I were to ascend to heaven, you would be there. If I were to sprawl out in Sheol, there you would be. If I were to fly away on the wings of the dawn, he's just starting to make things up, right? Now trying to fathom, where can I go? You were everywhere. If I were to fly away on the wings of the dawn and settle down on the other side of the sea, even there your hand would guide me. Your right hand would grab hold of me. If I were to say, certainly the darkness will cover me, and the light will turn to night all around me, even the darkness is not too dark for you to see. And the night is as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same to you. I absolutely love that. When you feel that life is dark or the thinking around us seems dark and it's heavy and it's you can just feel the need for hope. Just remember that. Remember, to God, the light and the dark is the same. He sees, he knows, he's everywhere. There's nothing that surprises him. There's nothing that catches him off guard. There's nothing he can't handle. Father, I just thank you for your word. Thank you that we can wrestle with it and that you're patient and gracious with us. I thank you that in our limited understanding, you let us find things sometimes, even thinking of science and some of the discoveries that you let us stumble upon, just simply to blow our minds and challenge us that, man, we don't know what we think we do. And we are so far from reaching the limits of what you have done already and what you're capable of and who you really are. I pray that we would just continue to challenge each other. I pray that for our youth, that we would, as the older generations, would be looking out for them, that we'd be praying for them, that we'd be seeking their best interest. I thank you for your love for all of us. Thank you for your Son. And it is in his name and because of him that we thank you this morning.